My kids said I was a burden and dumped me in a nursing home, but I smiled because I knew what my will would do to their greedy faces. The walls of this old Victorian house echo with memories. At 79, I've grown accustomed to the silence but never comfortable with it. Every morning, I still wind the grandfather clock in the foyer, the one Harold insisted we splurge on during our third anniversary. The steady tick-tock reminds me I'm still here, even when no one else is. Vermont winters are harsh, but I've weathered 47 of them in this house. Harold and I called it our soul place when we built it brick by brick in the summer of '78. He'd carry me across unfinished thresholds, laughing about how we'd grow old here. And we did, at least one of us did. I keep everything just so. The way Harold liked it. The embroidered tablecloths I made during my first pregnancy. The tea set we bought in Newport. The family photos I dust each morning, though nobody visits to see them anymore. Old habits die harder than old people, I suppose. Harold was the only person who ever truly understood me, my strategic thinker with the warm baritone voice that could smooth any argument. We built our agricultural export business from nothing in the '70s when everyone said a woman shouldn't be in boardrooms. Harold never said that. Maggie's got more business sense in her pinky than most men have in their entire bodies. He'd tell skeptical suppliers. He was our glue, the eternal optimist who balanced my pragmatism. "We'll figure it out, Mags." He'd say, even when the bank nearly foreclosed in '83, and we always did. Until that Tuesday. 3 years ago, I was tending to the lavender he'd planted for my special tea, when the phone rang. Harold had a stroke during what should have been a routine business trip to Chicago. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. Just like that. 52 years of marriage ended while I was trimming herbs. The house became a mausoleum after that. No one to share meals with. No one to fix the flickering bathroom light. No one to enjoy Friday evening jazz records and whiskey sours. I'd wake up reaching for him only to find cool sheets and silence. The company started slipping without him. I attended the meetings, signed the papers, but my mind was foggy with grief. The old employees who knew me retired. The new ones looked at me like I was a relic. Eventually, I resigned. Quietly, didn't even tell Ethan or Rachel. I couldn't bear to have them think their mother had grown weak. My children, Ethan, 46. A civil engineer with his father's height, but none of his warmth. Always too busy with some project, some deadline. His wife Tanya makes no secret of her dislike for me, always checking her watch. During visits, sighing heavily when I speak. Rachel, 44, a marketing director who speaks in business jargon even at Christmas dinner. Divorced 3 years ago with sweet little Lily, who's 8 now. They live in Boston too far for regular visits. At least, that's Rachel's excuse. After Harold died, they called weekly at first, then monthly. Now I'm lucky to get a text message with a simple, "Busy mom." I send handwritten letters with old photos tucked inside, hoping to remind them of happier times. They never write back. Last Thanksgiving, I prepared a full dinner for 6 turkey cranberry sauce, Harold's favorite bourbon sweet potatoes. I set the table with our best china. Nobody came. I sat alone for 4 hours watching the clock each passing minute like a knife in my heart. My hearing started failing around the same time. First, the morning birdsong disappeared, then the alarm clock became muffled, then the television in the next room sounded underwater. The doctor diagnosed sensorineural hearing loss, age-related. He said I didn't cry, but something inside me constricted. I got hearing aids, but rarely wear them now. What's the point? There's nothing left to hear but an empty house creaking. Last month, I found myself sorting through Harold's old letters, the ones he wrote during business trips. Inside a weathered envelope was a strange note without a recipient name. "If I'm gone someday, don't believe everything they tell you. There are things they want to keep from you." It was signed simply, H. Who was they? Our children. Someone at the company. The letter had no date, no context, troubled. I searched his old safe that night. Behind the insurance policies and birth certificates, I found a company ownership certificate with share numbers far larger than I'd ever known about. Harold had hidden something from me, or perhaps from our children. And now I wonder what else lies buried beneath the silence of these walls that once held so much love. I've tried everything to bring my family back together. Last month, I sent Rachel 2 tickets to the Vermont Symphony Orchestra's spring performance, Harold's favorite Brahms concerto. She'd always loved classical music as a child. I remember how she'd sway in her little velvet dress when Harold played records on Sunday afternoons. Her response came 4 days later. In meetings all weekend. Rain check. There was never any mention of that rain check again. The tickets remained on my dresser until the date passed. 2 empty seats that could have held memories. When the furnace started making that rattling sound Harold used to fix, I called Ethan. He'd always been good with his hands, just like his father. As a teenager, he'd hover beside Harold during home repairs, handing tools and absorbing knowledge. I thought maybe fixing something in his childhood home might rekindle something in him. "I'll send someone," he texted back. The next day, a stranger in overalls tramped through my house tracking mud on the carpet. Harold and I had saved 3 months to buy in 1993. The man barely spoke to me, just fixed the furnace and left. That evening, Ethan messaged, "Transferred money for the repair. Don't worry about it, Mom." As if money was what I needed from my son. I even arranged a family lunch last weekend, spending 2 days cooking Ethan's favorite pot roast with pearl onions and Rachel's beloved lemon tart with the candied zest she used to pick off first as a child. My fingers ached from the chopping and stirring, but it felt good to prepare food for my children again. I set the table for 4, 5 counting Lily, using the good china Harold insisted we save for occasions that matter. I polished the silver candle holders, cut fresh flowers from the garden, and even made little name cards the way we used to for holiday dinners. Rachel canceled 30 minutes before citing a client emergency. Ethan texted that Tanya's schedule got complicated. I ate alone at my perfectly set table again. The tart dried out in the refrigerator over the next week until I finally threw it away. When they do visit, the distance feels greater than any physical miles. Ethan came by last week and spent the entire hour staring at his phone responding to emails. His thumbs never stopped moving like anxious creatures with lives of their own. Occasionally he'd grunt, "Uh-huh," without looking up. When I spoke, Tanya said a perfunctory, "Hello, Margaret," before disappearing into another room to make calls. She doesn't call me Mom. Never has in the 20 years they've been married. I overheard her once tell a friend, "I didn't marry his mother, just him." As if the two could be separated, Rachel stops by for exactly 15 minutes when she's in town. I've timed it. She glances at her watch every few minutes, tapping her foot to some internal countdown. She brings Lily sometimes, but keeps her hand firmly on the child's shoulder as if afraid I might contaminate her somehow. When I asked about her recent promotion, she sighed with that look executives reserve for interns who ask obvious questions. "It's complicated, Mom. Too long to explain." As if I wouldn't understand. Or, as if my time wasn't worth the explanation. This from the daughter who used to practice her school presentations in front of me, who relied on my feedback for every college essay. I've started noticing the look in their eyes when they think I'm not watching. There's no warmth anymore, no spark of recognition or connection, just obligation thinly disguised as dutiful visits. They look at me the way people look at tasks they've been assigned against their will. Sometimes Ethan's eyes drift to the corners of rooms, assessing, calculating the way Harold used to when we'd visit houses for sale, except we were planning beginnings, and I fear Ethan is planning an end. One afternoon, Ethan came over to change a light bulb in my bedroom, a simple task Harold would have done in seconds. While reaching for the fixture, his phone rang. He thought I couldn't hear from where I sat in my chair across the room pretending to read. No, Mom can't hear anything, he said quietly to Rachel. His voice dropped to a whisper. She just sits there like a statue. I think she's losing it. Yesterday she asked me the same question twice in 10 minutes. I kept my face perfectly blank. I didn't react. Didn't let on. My heart cracked in two. But I maintained that empty stare they've come to expect from old deaf Margaret. The question I'd repeated wasn't because I forgot, it was because he'd never actually answered the first time, too busy checking his stock portfolio. That night, I took out my hearing aids and placed them in their case. I didn't throw them away, just stopped wearing them. If they thought I was deaf, I'd be deaf. Sometimes you hear more truth that way. Let them think I was slipping away. I'd use their assumptions as my cover. The truths I discovered were brutal. One Sunday, Rachel brought Lily over, while I was supposedly napping in my recliner. Eyes closed but mind alert, I saw Rachel showing Lily pictures on her iPad of a place called Sun Haven. It looked like a cross between a hotel and a hospital. "This is where Grandma might stay soon," she whispered. "They have nurses to take care of her and other people her age to talk to." Later, she FaceTimed her ex-husband in the kitchen. "Mom's becoming a burden. We can't keep doing this. The house is too big for her anyway, and she's sitting on a gold mine." Ethan visits, but never stays for meals anymore. Once he brought paperwork for me to sign property tax documents he claimed. When he stepped outside to take a call, Tanya remained thinking I was lost in television. She whispered to someone on her phone, "When is his mother going to be out of here? The house alone must be worth a fortune. We could put Leo in private school with just a portion of it." These children, whom I nursed at my breast, whose fevers I monitored through sleepless nights, whose nightmares I soothed with stories, now want to discard me like an inconvenient piece of furniture that no longer matches their decor. The small cruelties accumulate like dust in corners. Rachel gave me an expensive bone china tea set for Christmas, all delicate blue flowers and gold trim, but she never once sat down to share a cup with me, to christen the pot with conversation and warmth. I left our family photo album prominently on the coffee table during Ethan's last visit, the one with pictures of fishing trips with Harold and the summer we built the treehouse. He never even opened it, though his fingers twitched toward it once before he pulled out his phone. Instead, I wrote heartfelt letters to both of them about Harold's anniversary, remembering moments they'd shared with their father. The letters remain unopened on the kitchen counter, gathering coffee rings and grocery lists. Then the questions started casual, but rehearsed like actors who've memorized lines but haven't quite mastered the emotion behind them. "Mom," Rachel asked during a rare dinner together, her voice artificially light, "what would you think about a place that's quiet, beautiful, with 24-hour staff to help you relax? Wouldn't that be nice? No more worrying about the furnace or climbing those dangerous stairs." Ethan began asking me to sign a temporary power of attorney, just to make handling your affairs easier when you're not feeling well. When I asked what affairs needed handling, he mentioned bills and maintenance decisions. With a vague wave of his hand, I pretended I needed to review the paperwork first. That document has been sitting untouched in my desk drawer for weeks. A landmine I refuse to step on. I sense them coordinating, planning something behind those hurried texts and quick glances they exchange when they think I'm focusing on my tea or the television. There's a conspiracy forming, but I can't quite grasp its shape yet. Their sudden concern for my comfort and security feels hollow, a pretense for something else. Then yesterday, while cleaning out Harold's old dresser, something I should have done years ago, but couldn't bear to, I found it. A printed budget spreadsheet slipped between two sweaters in Ethan's distinctive handwriting. There, highlighted in yellow, "Projected house sale June next year after Mom relocates." Below it, a list of realtors and estimated values far higher than I'd imagined. They're planning to sell my soul place, the home Harold and I built from nothing but love and determination, and they're planning to relocate me somewhere else first, like an inconvenient heirloom that needs to be stored away before the estate sale begins. February in Vermont brings a special kind of cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes old injuries ache. I was carrying a basket of laundry down the stairs when it happened. One misstep on the third step from the bottom, and suddenly I was airborne, then crashing down. The pain was immediate and blinding. I lay there on the hardwood floor, blood from my nose staining the collar of my favorite cardigan, the blue one Harold bought me in Cape Cod. No one knew. No one came. For nearly 2 hours, I dragged myself inch by inch toward the telephone in the hallway, leaving a trail of blood drops on the floor. Harold had refinished himself the summer before his stroke. When I finally called 911, my voice sounded foreign to my own ears, weak and trembling, like an old record played at the wrong speed. Ethan arrived at the hospital 4 hours after they admitted me, his tie loose and jacket wrinkled from a day of meetings. Rachel didn't come at all, just texted, "Glad you're okay. Mom busy, week ahead." As if her mother lying in a hospital bed with 3 bruised ribs and a fractured wrist was a minor inconvenience in her calendar. "You can't live alone anymore," Rachel declared 3 days later when she finally appeared, designer handbag slung over one shoulder, scrolling through her phone even as she spoke to me. I nodded weakly, partly from the pain medication, partly from exhaustion. Fighting seemed pointless. Now Rachel's house in Boston is sleek and modern, all glass and chrome and spotless white furniture that shows every smudge. I was assigned to a converted storage room at the end of a long hallway, close to the dehumidifier that rumbles constantly. The room has a small window that faces the brick wall of the neighboring townhouse. Each morning, I sit for hours watching the narrow beam of sunlight crawl across the synthetic curtain, the only proof that time still passes in this limbo. My daughter's home might as well be a foreign country where I don't speak the language. Rachel holds constant Zoom meetings in her home office, and I've been instructed to remain silent during business hours, which seem to stretch from 7 a.m. until well past 8 p.m. "Mom, please, I'm on a call." She'll snap if my slippers make too much noise on the hardwood floors. I've taken to remaining in my room most of the day, reading the same 3 books I brought with me over and over. Mealtimes are exercises in isolation. Rachel and Lily sit at the kitchen island, their heads bent close, murmuring and laughing at private jokes. I sit across from them, smiling and nodding at conversations I can barely hear. They rarely look up, their mouths moving, then suddenly laughing, then falling silent. I've become invisible, present in body, but erased from the family dynamic. The only warmth in this sterile home comes from little Lily. She slips into my room, sometimes clutching a drawing of a flower or a bird she's made at school. She sits beside me on the narrow bed, sketching quietly while I watch. One afternoon, she looked up suddenly, her 8-year-old eyes solemn. "Grandma, you look sad all the time. Nobody notices but me." My heart constricted. At least one person in this house still sees me as human. I began writing little notes for Lily, hiding them under her pillow, fairy tales of my invention, compliments about her artwork, memories of her grandfather that she's too young to remember clearly. Your grandpa Harold could whistle any song after hearing it just once. I wrote on a scrap of paper folded into an origami bird. "He taught your mother to whistle Somewhere Over the Rainbow when she was just about your age." Rachel's patience, what little existed, frayed visibly as weeks passed. She complained about my long showers, about how slowly I moved down the hallway, about the teacup I left on the counter. "Mom, that's not where it goes," she'd say, the same tone she used with Lily when she tracked mud inside. I overheard her on the phone one morning when she thought I was still asleep. She laughed a brittle sound and said to someone, probably a friend, "My mother acts like this is her house. I feel like I'm living with a ghost who keeps rearranging my stuff." I understood then I was just an unwelcome visitor in the world I had created. My own daughter saw me as an intruder in the life I'd given her. After 6 weeks, Rachel announced she had an extended business trip. "Ethan can take you for a while," she said, not looking up from her laptop. Not asking, telling Ethan's house in Albany was worse. My son and Tanya live in a sprawling suburban home with a 3-car garage and a finished basement I was installed in, what had clearly been a storage room adjacent to the garage. It smelled of motor oil and mildew, the walls bare except for a cheap print of a seascape from a discount store. Tanya barely speaks to me. When she does, her words are clipped, her smile tight, and never reaching her eyes. Each time I try to help folding laundry or washing dishes, she shoos me away. "Don't trouble yourself, Margaret. You should rest." Her tone makes it clear: don't touch our things, don't make yourself useful, don't belong. The isolation here is even more complete. Meals appear and disappear. Without my knowledge, I'll emerge from my room to find the dining table clear, dishes already in the dishwasher. Once I sat in my room for 3 hours waiting for someone to call me for dinner. When I finally ventured out, the kitchen was dark, the house quiet. They had eaten and gone to bed without a word to me. Ethan has become a stranger. This tall man with Harold's eyes but none of his warmth. He entered my room one evening without knocking, didn't even look at me sitting on the bed. "Mom, have you thought about signing those property power of attorney papers? It would make everything easier." Easier for whom I wanted to ask, but just nodded vaguely and said I was still thinking about it. He left without another word, his mind already elsewhere. The small wounds accumulate day by day. I hear Tanya on her phone deliberately standing near my room, making sure I, accidentally, overhear. I'm going crazy here. It's like living with a shadow always lurking in corners. Ethan needs to figure out something permanent. I try to make myself useful. I fold the clean towels I find in the dryer. I rinse dishes left in the sink. Each time, Tanya's response is the same: a brittle smile followed by that icy tone. "We don't need to trouble you with that, Margaret, not Mom, or even Mrs. Winslow, just Margaret." As if we're distant acquaintances forced to share space at a dinner party, I have become a ghost ahead of schedule, haunting the homes of my children before I'm even dead. I brought these people into the world, taught them to speak and walk and dream. Now they can barely stand to have me in their sight. The irony would be amusing if it didn't hurt so much yesterday. While straightening my room, the only space I'm allowed to touch, I noticed Ethan's office door ajar. A printed email lay on his desk, the header clearly visible. "Confidential nursing home options, Hudson Valley region." Below it, a list of facilities with price points and amenities, several highlighted in yellow. They're not just planning to sell my house. They're planning to store me away, where they won't have to see me at all. One Saturday morning in late March, Rachel's silver SUV pulled into Ethan's driveway. I watched from my window, surprised to see her without Lily. The sisters-in-law never got along. Tanya thought Rachel was pretentious. Rachel thought Tanya was shallow. Yet here they were together on a weekend. Something was brewing. They disappeared into the living room, closing the French doors behind them. I took my book and my shawl and settled in the adjoining study, pretending to read Agatha Christie while straining to hear through the thin wall. They thought my hearing was gone, which gave me the perfect cover. I'm at my breaking point. Rachel's voice came through crystal clear. "Scarlett can't handle Mom being at my place anymore. I'm losing my mind too. If she stays with either of us any longer, we won't have lives left." "I've found a place," Ethan replied, his voice lower but still audible. "The key is convincing her it's like a resort, just a few months of relaxation. They have medical staff, activities, everything she needs." My heart sank into my worn slippers. So this was their plan, not just selling my home but tucking me away somewhere permanently. For the next hour, I listened as they devised their strategy with the precision of military generals planning an invasion. They prepared photos and promotional videos of Sun Haven Retreat, a nursing home they'd scouted in the Hudson Valley. The photos they'd share with me would emphasize gardens and common areas, carefully avoiding anything that looked institutional. We'll tell her it's a birthday gift. Rachel suggested her marketing expertise put to use against her own mother. Say she deserves to rest after her fall, that we've arranged a few weeks of pampering. Tanya, who'd joined them midway through, offered her contribution. Tell her it's a free care package from the insurance company. Short-term respite care, that's what they call it. Perfect. Ethan agreed. She won't want to waste something that's already paid for. They spoke about me as if I were a logistical problem, not a person. Not their mother who'd kissed their scraped knees and stayed up with their fevers. Just a burden to be efficiently relocated. Their approach began the following week. Rachel arrived with a glossy brochure sitting beside me on my narrow bed, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. Look at this place. Mom Lavender Gardens for your tea. Watercolor classes every Tuesday. A reading room with these gorgeous windows overlooking the pine forest. She flipped through professionally shot photos of smiling seniors painting and reading. She took my hand in hers, her fingers cold against my papery skin. You deserve to rest, Mom, just a few weeks to recover properly. Then you'll feel so much better. Ethan brought a stack of new novels a few days later. Take these with you to read, Mom. Maybe you'll meet someone who likes the same books. Wouldn't that be nice? His smile seemed genuine, and for a moment, just a moment, tears welled in my eyes. Perhaps I'd been wrong about their intentions. I wavered between suspicion and hope. Lily's reaction settled it. When Rachel brought her to say goodbye, the child's eyes were red-rimmed. She pressed her fabric doll into my hands. Take Daisy with you so you won't miss me too much. She whispered, her small shoulders slumped in resignation. Children sense what adults often hide. If my 8-year-old granddaughter was grieving, this was no short vacation. Still, what choice did I have? If I refused to believe my own children, the people I'd given life to, who was left in this world to trust, I began packing a few warm sweaters, the lavender dress Harold had given me on our 40th anniversary, a family photo in a silver frame, and the bundle of letters I'd never sent them over these lonely years. The drive to Sun Haven took nearly 3 hours. Ethan drove while Rachel sat beside him, both unusually chatty. They played Harold's favorite jazz station and reminisced about family camping trips from decades ago. It felt eerily like a final journey dressed up as a pleasant outing. As we turned onto a small road winding through dense woods, my stomach tightened. A weathered sign partially covered by overgrown branches read, Sun Haven, Private Facility. The half-hidden words, long-term care, had been deliberately obscured by a strategically placed potted plant. The parking lot was empty except for a few staff cars. The building itself, a small white structure with institutional windows, had none of the resort-like qualities from the brochure. As we approached, the unmistakable smell of disinfectant overwhelmed the pine scent I'd been promised. I expected a tour, perhaps a welcoming committee. Instead, a harried nurse with a clipboard led us directly to room 1Q7. No lavender gardens, no art studio. Just a sparse room with 2 plastic chairs, a window painted halfway up for privacy, and a metal hospital bed. When will I be coming home? I asked as Rachel arranged my few possessions in the small dresser. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Let's get you settled in first, then we'll see. His eyes darted to Rachel, seeking permission to escape. They stayed less than 30 minutes. Quick hugs, promises to visit soon, assurances that I'd love it once I got used to it. Then they were gone, and the door closed behind them with a click that sounded alarmingly like a lock. Engaging a different nurse entered shortly after, carrying a file labeled Margaret Winslow, long-term resident. On top was a form stating patient not to leave grounds without supervision. No one had mentioned any such restrictions during our drive. I rose shakily from the bed and walked to the door. It opened, not locked, after all, just heavy. I stepped into the hallway and saw the Truth elderly residents in wheelchairs staring vacantly at walls, a television blaring to an empty room, a bulletin board with a faded activities schedule showing nothing resembling the watercolor classes I'd been promised. Back in my room, I picked up the silver frame holding our family photo. I looked into Harold's eyes, so alive and knowing even in that frozen moment. And then I understood, with perfect clarity, I had been abandoned. My children had lied to my face and left me here. This was no vacation. This was exile. That evening, as the facility grew quiet, I carefully opened the bedside drawer, looking for a notepad to begin recording my thoughts. Inside, partially hidden beneath a Gideon Bible, was a postcard. On it, in shaky handwriting, "Mrs. Winslow, don't believe what they told you. I was brought here with the exact same story. Room 210. Morning at Sunhaven Retreat brought no sunrise yoga classes, no gourmet breakfast, no cheerful staff inquiring about my sleep. Instead, I woke to the distant sound of medicine carts rattling down hallways and the faint moans of confused residents. Room 107 revealed its true nature in the harsh morning light, a space designed for utility, not comfort. The walls were institutional beige, chipped in places and stained in others. My bed had metal railings that could be raised to prevent falls or escapes. The dresser wobbled on uneven legs and the single window was sealed shut, its glass frosted halfway up for privacy, but really preventing any clear view of the outside world. The disinfectant smell mingled with mustiness, creating a scent that clung to everything I ventured outside that first morning, seeking the lavender gardens Rachel had rhapsodized about. Instead, I found a concrete courtyard with a few neglected planters containing withered stems and dry soil. A plastic bench stood under a stunted tree, offering minimal shade. A cigarette butt garden flourished where actual flowers should have been. The nurse who had checked me in Nurse Holden, according to her name tag, handed me a printed schedule: breakfast at 7, medications at 7:30, group activity at 9, lunch at 11:30. It continued like this, every moment accounted for, but nothing resembling the creative writing workshops or mindfulness sessions promised in the glossy brochure. "When do the watercolor classes start?" I asked. She looked confused. "Watercolors. We do arts and crafts on Thursdays, construction paper and glue sticks." She spoke as if addressing a child, loud and over-enunciated, despite my hearing being perfectly functional. At breakfast, I met my fellow residents. Most sat silently staring at unappetizing plates of lukewarm scrambled eggs and white toast. Some needed assistance eating, others pushed food around without consuming it. Conversation was minimal, faces blank or bewildered. I was assigned to a table with 3 other women. Across from me sat Eloise, a small woman with cloudy eyes who repeated the same phrase every few minutes: "I want to go home, I want to go home." No one responded to her. Not staff. Not other residents. It was as if her words had become white noise, like the constant hum of the heating system. To my left was a woman who never spoke, only hummed tunelessly. To my right, an empty chair that various aides would briefly occupy when helping Eloise eat, then abandon. On my 3rd day, I met Bell Thomas Bell, a former high school principal with a spine still military straight, despite his 90 years. He caught me examining an activity calendar that promised movie nights and bingo sessions that rarely materialized. "Don't get your hopes up," he said in a low voice. "This place is like a roach motel. They check in, but they don't check out." His bluntness was refreshing after days of patronizing smiles from staff. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. He replied without hesitation. "My daughter said it was for rehab after my hip replacement." That was a lie. I thought about the cryptic postcard I'd found. Someone else had lived, This same betrayal had tried to warn others. That afternoon, a staff member presented me with a stack of forms, standard admission paperwork. She explained breezily, but as I read through the documents, my stomach tightened. These weren't short-term stay agreements. They were long-term care residency forms, DNR options, and power of attorney transfers. There must be a mistake, I said. I'm only here temporarily for rest. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course, Mrs. Winslow, but we still need these signed for our records. I refused. I wrote temporary stay only across the top and handed them back. She took them without comment, but I noticed her making notes in my file afterward. Patient exhibits mild cognitive confusion, resistant to standard protocols. That night, I examined the postcard more carefully. The blue ink had faded, but the message remained clear. I, too, was brought here with promises of relaxation. Beware of sweet words. It was unsigned except for Room 210. The next morning, I casually asked a young aide about Room 210 while she checked my blood pressure. Who was in that room before? I inquired. She avoided my eyes. I'm not sure, I haven't been here that long. Later, I approached Nurse Holden with the same question. Room 210. That's vacant now, she said briskly, changing the subject. That night, after everyone had retired, I slipped out of my room. The hallway was dimly lit, the night staff minimal, I found. Room 210 easily, it was in the east wing, its door firmly closed. Unlike other vacant rooms I'd seen left open for cleaning, this one was locked. Through the narrow window in the door, I could make out wheel marks on the carpet and several newspapers stacked on a side table as if the room were preserved rather than truly empty. On the wall calendar still hanging by the bed, the last date circled was from 4 years ago. Someone had lived here, had written that warning, and then what? Been moved. Passed away. Escaped. The questions haunted me as I crept back to my room. I began keeping a journal using a notebook Lily had slipped into my bag. Each night, I recorded my observations, the false promises, the condescending staff, the resigned residents. I wrote about Harold, memories of our life together that I refused to let fade. I documented the silence from my children. No calls, no visits. Though barely a week had passed, writing became my lifeline, my way of maintaining sanity in a place designed to erase individuality. I write, therefore, I am. I scribbled one night, a wry smile on my face, as I imagined Harold's appreciative chuckle at my philosophical reference. I developed small acts of resistance. I woke before the mandatory 7 a.m. wake-up call, claiming those quiet moments as my own. During meal times, I engaged other residents in conversation, asking direct questions. Do you remember how you came here? What did your family tell you? Most stared blankly, but occasionally a flicker of awareness would cross someone's face. Recognition of a shared deception. I began hiding supplies, an extra pen tucked into my mattress seam, sheets of paper folded into the lining of my sweater. If they took my journal, I would start again. I would not disappear quietly into institutional oblivion. 2 weeks into my stay, as I sat in the day room, pretending to watch a rerun of The Price is Right, Rachel called. Her voice was cheerful, asking about activities and new friends, as if I were at summer camp instead of exiled to this warehouse for the inconvenient elderly. I answered in vague terms, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of hearing my distress. We'll visit soon. She promised the lie, transparent even through the phone line. As darkness fell that evening, I heard unfamiliar footsteps in the hallway, lighter, quicker than the usual staff shuffle. Peering through my doorway, I saw a young woman walking purposefully down the corridor. She wore street clothes, not the scrubs of the nursing staff. As she passed the stairwell, she paused, glancing around before gently placing something on the handrail, a small purple flower, a sprig of lavender. Our eyes met briefly before she continued on her way. Who was this visitor in the night leaving tokens of the garden I'd been promised but never found? I first met Mariah Jones properly during the morning medication rounds. Unlike the other staff who breezed in and out, she paused at my bedside, taking time to make eye contact. She was in her early 40s, African American, with a quiet presence that conveyed more dignity than the institutional setting deserved. Mrs. Winslow, she said, not shouting as others did when they assumed my hearing was gone. How did you sleep? Her question wasn't the perfunctory checkbox kind. She actually waited for my answer. Over the next few days, I noticed the differences. Other nurses rushed residents through meals. Finish up, Mrs. Peterson, we don't have all day. But Mariah allowed people to eat at their own pace. Others spoke about residents in their presence as if they were furniture. She needs a diaper change, or he's being difficult again. But Mariah addressed everyone directly with respect. Most telling was her gaze. The standard look from staff was either impatient or pitying, like we were broken appliances they couldn't fix. Mariah's eyes held something rarer attention. She actually saw us. One morning, as I stood in my usual spot by the stairwell watching through the window as birds fluttered around the feeder outside, Mariah approached. Without a word, she placed something on the handrail beside me, a sprig of lavender, its purple buds fragrant against the antiseptic air. You were the one, I said, remembering the figure in the hallway nights before. She gave a slight nod. You mentioned in your intake that you used to grow lavender for tea. I thought you might miss it. The small kindness nearly broke me. After weeks of being treated as a case number, someone had remembered a detail about my actual life. The next day, Mariah slipped me a folded piece of paper during her morning rounds. Inside was a handwritten copy of Emily Dickinson's Hope is the Thing with Feathers. I read it twice. The familiar words like cool water after a drought. Do you like poetry? She asked when she returned. I nodded, then took a risk. I retrieved a page from my journal. Not words. Just the raw feelings I'd scribbled one night when sleep eluded me, and memories of Harold had felt so vivid it was like being haunted. Mariah read it, her expression unchanging. Then she simply placed her hand on my shoulder, a gesture more eloquent than any spoken platitude. Our conversations grew deeper in stolen moments. 5 minutes during medication, brief exchanges in the quiet of early morning shifts, when most residents still slept. I told her about Harold's warm laugh about building our company from nothing, about the biannual trips we took to Vermont's Northeast Kingdom, just to see the fall colors I described the children who once loved me, before ambition and inconvenience transformed their hearts. Finally, I confessed the elaborate deception that had landed me in Sun Haven. Mariah didn't offer empty reassurances or claim to understand. Instead, she said something that validated everything I'd been feeling. Many residents here aren't deaf or ill or confused. They're just discarded families. Find it easier to believe their loved ones are failing than to face their own failure to care. I gathered my courage and asked about Room 210, about the mysterious postcard writer who had left that warning. Mariah's face stilled, her eyes becoming distant. After a long pause, she simply said, "Don't go there at night, Mrs. Winslow. Sometimes memories are more dangerous than truth." The cryptic answer only sharpened my curiosity, but I sensed a boundary I shouldn't push. Instead, I began reclaiming small pieces of myself. I joined the knitting circle not for the activity itself, but for the company of Mrs. Selina Waters, a former literature professor who could still recite Shakespeare. Despite forgetting what she'd had for breakfast, I attended the book club where Mr. Bell and 3 other residents discussed dog-eared paperbacks from the meager library. Each day, I carved out 1 hour for writing letters to Lily. She might never receive journal entries documenting the subtle indignities of institutional life, memories of Harold that I refused to let fade into the institutional beige. As trust grew between us, I began asking Mariah more pointed questions about legal matters. What rights do elderly people have when they're brought to places like this without consent? She was careful with her answers, conscious of her position, but promised to look into resources. A week later, she slipped me printouts about elder rights, guardianship laws, and contact information for advocacy groups. I noticed the physical changes in myself that I couldn't deny. Walking the length of the corridor left me winded now. My hands trembled when I tried to write for too long, and sometimes words slipped away from me mid-sentence like fish darting through fingers. I hid these symptoms from Mariah. At first, pride. Perhaps I didn't want her pity on top of everyone else's, but I knew the truth. Time was becoming my scarcest resource. One evening, in late April, as cherry blossoms appeared on the single tree visible from the day room window, I shared my emerging plan with Mariah. I want to rewrite my will, I said quietly, careful that no one could overhear. And I want to leave something for Lily when she's older, something they can't erase or explain away. Mariah considered this, her face thoughtful. What kind of legacy? Something indelible, a truth, a voice, a moral inheritance. They've taken my home, my dignity, my daily presence in my granddaughter's life, but they can't take my final statement. She nodded slowly. Then you need to write it all down. Don't let anyone else tell your story for you. Over the next weeks, I drafted my final testimony, not just a will, but a record of what had happened, of the calculated betrayal of my clear-minded understanding of it all. I wrote it in fits and starts, hiding the pages throughout my room. When it was complete, I sealed it in an envelope with a letter to Gregory Bennett Harold's old attorney, and the only outside person I still trusted. I gave it to Mariah during her night shift. If I can't deliver this myself, will you make sure it reaches this address? She took the envelope, her fingers closing around it with purpose. I promise, Mrs. Winslow. Whether you're here or gone, this will reach the right hands. She held my gaze, then squeezed my hand, a firm, lingering pressure that conveyed more than words. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Harold died, the simple, profound relief of being witnessed. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months, a strange peace settling over me. Despite everything, around 2 a.m., something woke me. The hallway lights flickering in a rhythmic pattern. Not the usual random power fluctuation, but something deliberate, like a signal. Then I heard it, a whisper outside my door. Someone was calling my name, urgent but hushed. It wasn't Mariah's voice. The morning after the mysterious voice at my door, I woke to find breathing more difficult than ever before. My fingers tingled with numbness when I tried to write in my journal, and my thoughts seemed to scatter and reassemble like puzzle pieces in a child's clumsy hands. I knew what was happening. My body was beginning its final rebellion. Each day brought new betrayals from this vessel that had carried me for 79 years. The walk to the day room became a marathon, each breath a conscious effort. My handwriting, once praised by Harold for its elegant precision, now wavered across the page like an uncertain seismograph. One afternoon, Mariah found me standing at the window where I'd been for nearly an hour, watching rain trace patterns on the glass. My reflection showed a woman I barely recognized, hollow-cheeked, slightly stooped, with a bluish tinge to her lips. "Mrs. Winslow," she said softly, approaching with none of the rushed efficiency other staff used. "You don't look well?" I tried to smile, but even that small gesture required more energy than I could muster. My legs buckled slightly, and Mariah's arm was instantly around my waist, supporting me. I felt the cold sweat beading on my forehead, saw the alarm in her eyes as she registered my clammy skin. The resident physician confirmed what I already suspected. Mild heart failure compounded by chronic anemia. He prescribed medications I had no intention of taking. The blue and white pills remained hidden in napkins slipped into my pocket, later flushed away. "You should be on these medications," Mariah said privately when she found my untouched pill case. I covered her hand with mine. I don't want to extend this particular journey, dear. I just need enough time to finish what I've started. She didn't argue, recognizing the dignity in my choice. Instead, she brought me an extra pillow to help ease my breathing at night, and quietly adjusted my meals to include iron-rich foods, the kitchen normally reserved for special diets. With time becoming precious, I focused entirely on completing my final testament. This wasn't merely a will. It was my voice preserved beyond the grave, my last chance to speak truth after months of being silenced. In clear, steady paragraphs written on good days when my hands were cooperative, I explained everything. I was never deaf. I heard every whispered conversation, every dismissive remark, every plan made as if I weren't in the room. I chose silence as my shield, my way of learning the truth. I detailed the progression of my abandonment from the first missed calls after Harold's death to the elaborate scheme to place me in Sun Haven under false pretenses. I named names, recorded dates, preserved the paper trail of their deception. I revealed the truth about Winslow agricultural exports, how the company had never been in danger, how Harold and I had created contingency funds and diversified investments that continued to generate substantial income. I had pretended financial vulnerability to test my children's character. They had failed spectacularly. Most difficult were the pages about my true feelings for Ethan and Rachel, the love that persisted despite their betrayal, the grief for the people they had become, the regret that somewhere along the way they had learned to value convenience over compassion. I do not blame external forces for what has happened. I wrote, "Oh, our culture may devalue the elderly, but each person makes their own moral choices. I raised my children to make better ones." The final section was for Lily instructions, hopes, and warnings. I prayed would reach her when she was old enough to understand. With Mariah's help, I contacted Gregory Bennett, Harold's longtime attorney and a man of impeccable integrity. He had handled our affairs for decades, though I hadn't seen him since Harold's funeral. Through a video call Mariah arranged on her personal tablet, I explained my situation and my wishes. "I'll come myself." Gregory said, his silver hair and stern face unchanged by the years. His voice was tight with controlled anger when he understood what had happened. 2 days later, he arrived at Sun Haven, bypassing administrative obstacles with the formal authority of his profession. In my small room with Mariah as witness, I signed the new will. Ethan and Rachel would each receive 5% of my estate, enough to remind them of what they'd thrown away, but not enough to reward their betrayal. Lily would receive 10% in a trust fund accessible when she turned 18, along with a sealed letter explaining her grandmother's story in terms appropriate for her maturity. The remaining 80% the company shares the Vermont house, the investment portfolio, all of it would be transferred to a newly established Sun Haven Foundation dedicated to transforming the facility into a model of dignified elder care. Mariah would have a 1% honorary stake and a position on the board of directors. Gregory's eyes gleamed with something like satisfaction as he notarized the documents. "This is entirely legal and unassailable," he assured me. "Your competency is well established by our video consultation and today's meeting." After he left, I gave Mariah a separate envelope containing my personal journals and letters, the human story behind the legal documents. "If I'm gone before Gregory returns, please get this to him within 3 days," I instructed. She accepted the package with reverence. "I promise, Mrs. Winslow." I looked at her not as a caregiver or employee, but as the granddaughter of my heart that Rachel had refused to be. Her eyes filled, but she only said, "You're not alone anymore." The end came on a clear autumn morning. Mariah had wheeled me to a sheltered corner of the courtyard, where she'd established a small lavender patch, just a few plants in containers, but their scent carried on the breeze. She draped a warm blanket over my legs and positioned my chair to catch the morning sun. "I'll check on you in 20 minutes," she said, squeezing my shoulder before returning to her rounds. Sitting there, I felt a curious lightness. The pain in my chest had subsided, replaced by a spreading warmth. In the slanting sunlight, I thought I saw Harold standing by the gate wearing the blue sweater I'd given him for our last Christmas together. His hand raised in that familiar half-wave. I smiled, my fingers resting on the silver picture frame in my lap, the one containing our family photo from happier times. My breath came slower now, easier. The struggle was ending. I closed my eyes just for a moment. I never opened them again. Mariah arranged a simple memorial service in the Sun Haven Day Room. Mrs. Selena Waters read, Emily Dickinson, her academic voice, bringing dignity to the words, Mr. Bell shared stories I'd told him about Vermont and Harold, his principal's voice commanding attention from the small gathering of residents. Ethan and Rachel did not attend. They hadn't called once since dropping me off, 3 months earlier. According to Mariah, the facility's attempts to reach them had been met with vague promises to check schedules and get back to you. An impersonal bouquet of artificial flowers arrived from an anonymous sender. Mariah promptly deposited it in the trash bin. "Plastic flowers for a real woman," she muttered. "I don't think so." Instead, she placed fresh lavender on my empty chair, its purple blooms a quiet rebellion against institutional beige, 3 days after my quiet passing as my body was being prepared for the simple cremation I'd requested. Both Ethan and Rachel received certified letters from Gregory Bennett's law office. The formal language was coolly professional. "Your presence is required for the reading of Margaret Winslow's last will and testament. Enclosed documents of extraordinary sensitivity require in-person verification. Failure to appear will result in forfeiture of all inheritance claims." I wasn't there to witness it, of course, but Mariah described the scene in perfect detail when she visited my grave. Death has its privileges. I can imagine it all clearly, as if watching from above. Ethan and Rachel arrived at Gregory Bennett's downtown office on a crisp autumn morning. They had coordinated their appearances with the precision of actors preparing for important roles. Ethan in a charcoal suit that whispered old money. Rachel in a conservative black dress that suggested appropriate mourning without sacrificing style. They brought briefcases filled with property documents, bank statements, and hastily procured financial advisors' business cards. Their expectations were transparent. They believed they were about to inherit a fortune, the culmination of their calculated abandonment. Gregory met them in his private conference room, its walnut paneling and leather chairs exuding the gravitas of old legal traditions. His secretary, a woman who had worked with him since before Harold and I became clients, sat quietly in the corner with a stenographer's notepad. No electronic recordings. Gregory believed in doing things the proper way. Before we proceed to the reading of the will, Gregory began, his voice measured and formal. "Mrs. Winslow instructed me to share this handwritten letter with you both." My children exchanged quick glances. This wasn't part of the inheritance ritual they had anticipated. Gregory unfolded my letter, written in the steady hand I had managed during my better days at Sun Haven. He began reading my words aloud, his tone dispassionate but clear. "My dear children, I was never deaf. From the moment you first began discussing me as a burden, I heard every word I chose. Silence as my defense, and my witness. I was never losing my mind. I simply wanted to see if anyone would look past my age to recognize the person still living inside this older body. No one did, except a nurse at the facility where you abandoned me. The company never failed. Harold and I established contingency investments decades ago that continued to generate substantial income. I allowed you to believe otherwise as a test. Would you choose money or would you choose me? You made your decision clear. I do not blame you for the cultural disdain toward elders that permeates our society, but I do hold you accountable for your personal choices. I do not condemn you, but I cannot absolve you either." Gregory paused, giving the words time to land in the airless room. Rachel's face drained of color, her knuckles white as she gripped her designer handbag. Ethan's stoic expression cracked at the edges, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried and failed to swallow. For nearly 2 full minutes after Gregory finished reading, neither of my children spoke. The silence in the room was dense with realization, the truth finally landing with its full weight. Then came the legal proceedings. Gregory outlined the terms of my will with professional precision. Ethan would receive 5% of my estate, approximately $75,000. A significant sum for most people, but mere pennies compared to what he had anticipated. Rachel would receive the same 5% of the total assets, equally modest in comparison to her expectations. Lily's trust would hold 10% until her 18th birthday, along with a sealed letter to be delivered to her. At that time, Mariah Jones received a 1% honorary share and a permanent position on the newly established Board of Trustees. The remaining 79% the Vermont House. The company shares the investment portfolios. Everything of substance would transfer to the newly established Sunhaven Foundation, dedicated to transforming the facility into the Margaret Winslow Center for Dignified Aging. Rachel broke first. "Mom can't do this," she protested, her professional composure shattering. "She wasn't in her right mind. We'll contest this." Gregory silently pushed a tablet across the table. On it played a video recorded 2 weeks before my death. My face thin, but my eyes clear. My voice weakened, but my words precise as I outlined my desires and affirmed my mental competence. A physician stood beside me in the video, formally attesting to my cognitive clarity. Ethan rose suddenly, pushing back his chair with such force it nearly toppled. He walked 3 steps toward the door, then stopped. His shoulders slumped as he turned back, collapsing into his seat. When he finally looked up, his eyes were rimmed with red. Not from the loss of money, I believe, but from the dawning comprehension that he had lost his mother long before I actually died. His own actions had orphaned him, while I still breathed. In the separate envelope I had left for Lily was a different kind of inheritance. I wrote about summer afternoons chasing butterflies in our backyard, about the way sunlight caught in her hair as she ran. I described the drawings she had made for me, each one preserved and treasured beside my bed until the very end. Most importantly, I left her wisdom earned through painful experience. Never choose convenience over compassion. Dear one, love means holding on when it's difficult, not pushing away because it's easier. Remember that everyone grows old if they're lucky. It's not a failure or a flaw, but a privilege denied to many. You are the keeper of memories now. Guard them well. Mariah fulfilled her promise with unwavering dedication. She oversaw the transformation of Sunhaven from a warehouse for the unwanted elderly to a model of dignified care. The sterile corridors gave way to warm, home-like spaces. The meager activities expanded to include genuine art classes, music therapy, and gardens where residents could grow herbs and flowers. She compiled my journal entries into a staff training manual. The Dignity Protocol, required reading for every employee. My observations became lessons, my pain transformed into protection for others. Most importantly, she maintained a connection with Lily, sending her cards on birthdays, and carefully chosen excerpts from my writing, the parts appropriate for a young girl to read, preserving our bond across the divide of death. 1 year later, Lily's middle school class visited the Winslow Center as part of a community service project. She stood transfixed before my portrait in the main hall, me in my favorite purple sweater, pen in hand, smiling with the serenity that came in my final days. Beneath the portrait, a simple plaque bears the words "I chose" as my epitaph. I did not choose to live long. I chose to live indelibly. As evening settles over the Winslow Center, a gentle breeze stirs the lavender garden that now flourishes where concrete once dominated. An elderly resident reads poetry aloud from a bench beneath a maple tree. A young nurse sits nearby knitting while she listens. And somewhere in between, in that space where memory lives beyond flesh, I remain present. My story continuing to whisper its truth long after my voice has been silenced. For what is legacy but the echo of a life, reverberating through the choices of those who remember?